Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Kaplan. I'm the immediate past president of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. The JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the organized Jewish community in our nation's capital. We represent more than 100 organizations and synagogues throughout the region. A key component of our work is connecting our local Jewish community with Jews around the world, especially regarding issues of mutual concern. Thank you to the over 150 people from our region and throughout the country who are joining us for today's webinar with the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis. I had the pleasure of meeting Chief Rabbi Mervis last spring, just pre-pandemic, along with JCRC Executive Director Ron Halber and some fellow JCRC board members. We developed a warm relationship, sharing insights into our Jewish communities. It is with this in mind that we welcome Chief Rabbi Mervis to share his perspective on the personal and communal resilience that has been needed and that will be needed in a post-COVID era. Chief Rabbi Mervis will be interviewed by JCRC board member and local journalist Fran Kritz. Chief Rabbi Mervis was born and raised in South Africa. He studied in yeshivot in Israel and has previously served as Chief Rabbi of Ireland and as Rabbi of the Marble Arch and Finchley synagogues in London. As Chief Rabbi, he is a primary representative of the Jewish community to government, other faiths, and civil society. Now in his 8th year in office, he is well known as a principled spiritual leader who has strengthened Jewish community life and broken new ground in the areas of education, interfaith, and social responsibility. Fran Kritz is a health policy reporter whose work frequently appears in the Washington Post and on NPR.org. For 10 years, Fran wrote a regular column on Jewish medical issues for the New York Jewish Week, and she has been a contributor to The Forward and to the Times of Israel. In addition to the JCRC, Fran also serves on the boards of social service agency Yad Yehuda and the Hebrew Free Loan Association of Greater Washington, and is a past president of Hebrew Free Loan and Bikur Cholim of Greater Washington. Fran, I now turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome, everyone. And Rabbi Mervis, what an incredible honor and pleasure it is to get this chance to speak with you. Thank you. As I mentioned when we got a chance to chat just before the conversation began, let me just go back to a bit of housekeeping and then I will tell you what I mentioned, and that is to let everyone know that this is an off-the-record conversation. It will be recorded with the recording available, and we've gotten some wonderful questions in that I look forward to sharing some of them. If you have questions, please put them in to the chat function or the Q&A function, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but I will do my best to ask some. And we also wanted to let everyone know that we're being joined from people all over the country in many different states, which is just a tribute to how much everyone wants to listen to you today. Rabbi Mervis, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran. Lovely to meet you in this way. And I've really been looking forward to this opportunity to engage with members of the Jewish community of Washington.
Thank you. I had mentioned when we spoke a few minutes ago that just one of the last things that I listened to before the pandemic, I was preparing for Passover, and there was a podcast that you wrote about the Seder with some such interesting highlights that I look forward to getting to. But before we talk about that, I wondered, this has been such an incredible year, if you would share a few minutes of reflection on the year that's passed and the year ahead of us.
So thank you so very much. And just one brief word of further introduction, as Sam mentioned, and it's so lovely to see him. I wish it was in person, and also so lovely to be able to engage again with Ron, whom I also met. Washington was the last overseas trip that I made. It was to the APAC conference just before the pandemic. It was at the beginning of March of last year. Sam said to me that he thinks that my hand was the last one that he shook before the pandemic started. We just had such a beautiful time together. We said it would be good to engage in the future. And I think this is the second best option available to us. And I hope that it won't be too long until I can personally be with you all. So thank you very much, Fran, for your opening question. And yes, what an extraordinary year it has been. And I think this word extraordinary has been used more often than ever before during the past year. There is a verse which we recite in our prayers every morning, Rabot machshavot levish vatzat Hashem hitakum. Many are the intentions of people, but it is the will of God which prevails. And I can't think of any other period in my life when this has been so relevant, because at the beginning of March of last year, we all had full diaries, and then suddenly in an instant, they were swept clear. And we've now had different agendas, different programs, what we were going to do for Pesach, our summer holidays, the autumn, Hanukkah. It's all been just so very different. And we've been thrust into a situation in which we've needed instantaneously to come up with a response of how we conduct our lives as individuals, as families, as communities, and as nations. And for me, there is so much that I could say, but you've asked for an opening comment. If there is one single lesson that stands out for me more than any other, it's the fact that COVID is on one side and all of humankind is on the other. We're all on the same side. The virus does not recognize borders. The virus does not differentiate between people of different color, different genders, different nationalities, different faiths. It's the virus on one side, all of humankind on the other. And this is surely a wake-up call for everybody in the world, prompting us to consider where we stand as far as other human beings are concerned. And I'm most of all mindful of the teaching in the Jerusalem Talmud, which says that the most important verse of our entire Torah is Genesis chapter 5, verse 1, which teaches us that every human being was created in the image of God. Everybody's special, and therefore we need to relate to everybody with love, with understanding, with tolerance. And that must be a most important message for all of us. And isn't it so very sad that in the midst of this message which is being conveyed to us, there is still so much disunity and so much enmity within our fragile world?
Thank you for that beautiful opening. And I think all of us listening agree. And I wonder, looking a little bit back, a lot back perhaps, you said that the word extraordinary has been used so much. The word unprecedented has also been used so much. But I wondered, what is a moment in Jewish history, if maybe not identical, then perhaps similar, that you might point us to, that was an inflection point of danger, but from which we emerged? And perhaps there are lessons from that?
So yeah, I think that's a great question. And if you don't mind, you asked me for one point in history, I'm going to give you four, but I'll try to be brief, okay? Because in this regard, there are four key moments in our history which share a common denominator. They are the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, the Bogdan-Khmelnytsky massacres in Europe in 1548 and 1648, and then the Shoah. Now, what do they have in common? Already the word resilience has been used in our conversation, and that is too a key term that is being used by many. But actually resilience is not a great word, because it comes from the Latin, which means to bounce back, to rebound, to go back to where you were before. And that's actually something which is impossible to do. Because circumstances have changed. In Hebrew, the word for resilience is chosen, which means inoculation, and that too is an imperfect word, because you can't neutralize, you can't be inoculated against tragedies, difficulties, adversity. So actually in our tradition, we have a different word, and it is nechama. It's translated as being comfort, but actually it's something well beyond comfort. Nechama in a biblical sense, when used in the Bible, means a change of direction. And that has been our Jewish response. It's been a paradigm shift at those key moments that you were asking about. So with the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the leader of the Jewish people at the time, while the temple was still standing, left Jerusalem in order to appeal to Vespasian, the Roman governor, saying, I want to establish a school in Yavne. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai guaranteed that a temple-centered faith would change to a study hall-centered faith. It was to be Jewish education which would guarantee Jewish survival. That was the paradigm shift that enabled us to survive as a people despite the destruction of the temple and our exile. With the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, our response as a people was Kabbalah. It was the development of Jewish mysticism. It was a new way of thought in order to project our ideas and to guarantee that we would survive. After the Bogdan Khmelnytsky massacres, we saw history giving rise to the advent of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, a new way of relating to God through song, through joy, and through celebrating what we had as opposed to lamenting what was lost. And in the aftermath of the Shoah, it was the creation of the State of Israel, which we had waited for nearly 2,000 years for, which has helped to guarantee Jewish survival, together, I would say, with greater intensity of Jewish education. So those would be the historic points that I would refer to, and they all call upon us now, as we are fortunately looking forward to the post-COVID era. We need to recognize that we need to have a paradigm shift. We're going to be pressing that reset button. Since the Second World War, we've been living in the post-war era. Soon we're going to be living in the post-COVID era. And it's now, during COVID, just like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did before the destruction of the temple, we need to sow those seeds for a successful survival of our people and of humankind in the post-COVID era.
If you were the technology director of the factory that was doing the reset, that was writing the code, what would you share with us? What do you think should go into resetting the button that we get to push, but that you will help us usher into?
I think about this perhaps more than anything else, because I recognize the responsibility that I have as a Jewish leader. But I think we're all in this together, and we need to give responses to this at a personal level, a family level, community, people, and national level, and also a global level. And in the first instance, we need to learn the lessons of COVID. We need to recognize the silver linings of this very dark cloud. And we need to, of course, accept that the cloud has been exceptionally dark. So many people have died, so much illness, so much adversity, so much loss of income, mental health issues, and so on. But together with that, people have been drawn together. The amount of chesed, of loving kindness, of altruism has been exceptionally inspirational. It's just been remarkable. We need to continue doing that. Right now, I'm on one side of the world communicating with all of you on the other. We're together. And we need to concentrate on building those bonds right across the airways and from one country to another. We need to concentrate on Jewish unity and on the unity of all of humankind. We need to exercise greater love towards our fellow human beings. We need to tackle xenophobia and racism, and of course anti-Semitism, which affects us so deeply. And of course, I know here I'm speaking to a Washington Jewish community which has experienced right on your doorstep such horrific events in the recent past. And we need to be inspired by the environment that we're in, because COVID has taught us the truth of what the book of Genesis says, where God placed us in this world, la'ovda u'lashomra, to work within it and to look after it. I think we're doing very well in working in it. We're phenomenally creative, and look at the vaccines that we've been able to produce. We're not doing well at the u'lashomra, to look after this world. and matters relating to climate change and our environment. That must be our top priority, because if we don't look after that within 100 years, the world won't be the same as what it is right now. Those are just a few thoughts.
And we're grateful for them. You know, looking at both as a board member of the JCRC, as a member of the Jewish community, there is so much work has gone in all over the world into inspiration for the Jewish community, words of consolation, words of help, words of strength, prayer services. At the beginning of COVID was marked by, in the United States, a Jewish food festival that had a little bit of something for everyone. You can join another synagogue or join a celebration or a film festival. I have found all of these things personally and communally so inspiring, but it's been a lot for rabbis, I think. I think I find myself sometimes even texting my rabbi at night and saying, how are we doing? You know, what do you think? What's going to happen? And I wondered, who do you turn to, or what books do you turn to? What resources? What are your sources of information when so many of us rely on you?
Oh, that's such a lovely question, and of course it's a deeply personal one, and I'm blessed. You know, there's a very easy answer to give, and that's family, wife, children, grandchildren, family, but it's so true. And I think those of us who entered into COVID with strong families have found that our families have been blessed further and have become even stronger. Those coming into COVID with dysfunctional families have found that it's been hell. It has really been terrible, and my heart goes out to people who have endured an enormous amount of suffering within lockdown situations, trapped within a home which isn't functioning as it should. So certainly I benefit from family, I benefit from experiences, and I suppose you'd expect me to say this, my faith, you know, it's God who sustains me and who keeps me going. But there's something I'm acutely aware of. You see, the relationship with God must be a partnership. We mentioned two different types of concepts. They are bitachon and hishtadlut. Bitachon means trust in God. So I need to call on God. I need to pray to him. At the same time, God is calling on me to have hishtadlut. What about your effort, God is saying? What are you doing? What's your strategy? What is your plan? Once I see you really trying, I'll meet you in the middle, and we can be a partnership. And actually, we learn this from the Torah right at this time of the year, as we approach the time when we recall the Exodus, because as the Israelites emerged from Egypt, they were caught between the Egyptians and the deep blue sea. And what was going to happen? Eventually, of course, the waters were parted. But at that moment, Moses did that which came naturally to him. He prostrated himself on the ground and started to pray to God. And then we find the only instance in which there is a record of God saying to somebody, stop praying. I'm not interested in your prayers. God called out to Moses and he said, Ma titzak elai, why are you calling out to me? Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisau, speak to the Israelites, travel, do something. At that moment, God said, this is not a time for prayer. It's a time for you to do something. Where's your strategy? What are you trying to do? Moses got up, spoke to the nation. They developed a plan. Nachshon jumped into the waters. The people followed, and then God performed his miracle. But he waited for us to do something before he performed the miracle. And isn't that the whole story of COVID? We're praying to God, but God's saying to all of us, keep the rules, look after your health, don't shake hands, right? Have your hands sanitized, keep your distances, wear masks, and you try your best. By looking after your health, you'll be looking after the health of others. Develop those vaccines, and I will also help you. And isn't that what's happened? The development of vaccines in 10 months, vaccines which usually would take at least 10 years to be developed, this has been a partnership. And that needs to be the way forward. Ourselves with God together.
You know, when you say that, you make me think that when we see greatness in the world, we bless God for sharing his greatness. I hadn't really thought about it before, but the idea that the fact that we have the vaccines It's our partnership, the brilliance, but also the dedication of people for so many years that I wonder if it makes you think a little bit about also telling people when we emerge from this, each one of us has skills. We may not realize it, but we don't know those people that toiled on messenger RNA and wondered if they'd ever get funding, saved our lives. That each of us has the potential, do you think, that both now, before we fully emerge, and later, that the skill that God has given us, we need to bring out into the world?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we must continue for all time to sow seeds. You never know when they will blossom, what they will develop. And if not for the seeds which have been sown in previous years, in unexpected and sometimes underfunded areas, who knows where we might be right now. And there's an additional point that you've mentioned. It's the value we attach to people. Pre-COVID, our heroes were celebrities, the people whose photos we saw, in magazines, and the famous people. Fame equals greatness. From COVID, we've learned no. Greatness is a nurse in a hospital, a doctor, a volunteer, somebody who stacks the shelves of the supermarket, and who's exposed to other people. COVID has taught us how every single individual can be an exceptionally special person. And that certainly is a lesson we need to carry with us into post-COVID times.
I was, by looking at the words that you shared on Twitter, on Facebook, through podcasts, through speaking, certainly the Jewish community has benefited so much through the past year in listening to you. I was wondering if you have also had a chance to share inspiration, to share words with the non-Jewish community as well. In what way, and is it any different?
So thank you for asking that. And yes, I'm in a privileged position through which I have a platform and I'm able to communicate. And you might recall that it wasn't that long before my visit to Washington a year ago that I intervened before the general election here in Britain at a time when Jeremy Corbyn was head of the Labour Party, and we had major issues at that time. And I never thought that my position would offer me further opportunities in a very different sphere, which is the pandemic. So yes, I can give you many examples, but if I would highlight just a few. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a three-way conversation which was recorded, a Zoom conversation between myself, the Cardinal of England and Wales, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. This was recorded and it was transmitted, and it certainly did the rounds. I had another conversation with Johnny Benjamin, who is somebody well known within British society, who campaigns for people suffering from mental illness, and mental illness is an issue which I have gone out of my way to highlight and to support during these very challenging times. But perhaps more than any other occasion was a conversation which was recorded by the BBC and was very much felt and listened to in the nation. This is the Archbishop of Canterbury and myself, because the BBC approached the two of us during this period of deep adversity, because they are aware of the fact that the Archbishop of Canterbury and I, he and his wife and my wife and myself and my wife, we share something of sadness because we've all lost a daughter. And so the BBC was interested just to hear from our personal sad experiences, how we have coped with adversity and what lessons we can give the nation through our own personal experiences. And I didn't appreciate at the time how deeply it would resonate with people. And it's certainly perhaps one of the most impactful things that I've had the privilege of doing. It was broadcast television, radio here, and then there's a longer podcast version, which actually the audience here today can tap into if they wish to. It is available. So we're very privileged here in the UK that Jewish leaders' voices are listened to. It gives me and others an enormous responsibility to carry this mantle in an appropriate way, so that it will always cause a Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God's name, and that Jewish values should be heard and appreciated.
I think I mentioned this a little bit before, but as you share that, you took your pain and loss and you were able to convey it into conversations for the greater world. That we have such a debt, I feel, to pay to our spiritual leaders here at the JCRC. We've had the opportunity to connect with with the various denominations and projects for the greater community. And I think that one thing I hope and I wonder, do you think in that way, as I might have seen sort of like a film festival at a conservative synagogue, or a prayer service on a Sunday morning at a tefillah of a Reform synagogue, or an Orthodox synagogue I wasn't a member of? Is that one thing that you think might emerge, just a little bit more of understanding among the denominations, because the barriers have been broken down? You've shared about yourself with the rest, and we've learned from that, and other people have as well. Is that something that you think might happen afterwards?
In general, what you're speaking about in spirit, I think, is a major lesson that we need to learn and we need to apply. Jewish unity has always been a priority of mine. I recall in my induction sermon that I gave in St. John's Wood Synagogue on the 1st of September 2013, when I became Chief Rabbi, and it was the first time that a representative of the royal family attended the induction into office of Chief Rabbi. Prince Charles was there, and he gave me the honor of attending. And on that occasion, one of my key messages was Jewish unity. And since then, I've been very keen to highlight an element of how I act as a Jewish leader, and that is, I've let it be known that I will never publicly condemn or attack any other elements of the Jewish world. If I have something constructive to say, it would be behind the scenes. We should not engage in any public attacks against each other. The analogy I give, gosh, I don't think it'll be familiar for our audience today. It's from the world of cricket. So, and basically the way I say it is, we should all be batsmen and not bowlers. So if it's in baseball, correct me if I'm right, we should all be batsmen and not pitchers. Would that be right? The guy with the bat.
Right, that's right. Batters and not pitchers, right? Batter, right.
Yeah, so we should all be batters and not pitchers, meaning our aim should be to score runs, to get the home runs. Our aim should not be to bowl people out, right? So therefore, I happen to be Orthodox. I'm proud of my Orthodox identity. Therefore, I need to speak positively about my values and to project a positive image of what I'm standing for. My aim should not be to bowl the Reform out, to attack them, to attack conservatives, etc. We need to get on well together. We need to respect each other. And one of my favorite messages relates to a symphony orchestra, because under the baton of the conductor, different instruments which each have their own separate, unique sounds blend together to produce perfect harmony. And that's what we need in the Jewish world. We need to understand that some of us make different sounds. We need to respect each other for those sounds. And under the baton of cooperation, let's produce harmony. And people often talk about tolerance. I think we need more than tolerance. Tolerance has a negative angle to it. I really dislike this person or this thing, but I'll tolerate them. The word we need is love. It's Ahavat Yisrael, natural love for our fellow Jews. And we also need Ahavat HaBriot, natural love for all human beings.
Thank you. I'm going to take a lesson from you, an immediate lesson, and to how inviting you are. And much as I could continue this conversation, just the two of us, and even sort of bring a cup of tea to share with you, we have some wonderful questions from our audience participants, and I'd like to go to some of those. We have a question about the loss of Rabbi Sachs this year, the former chief rabbi. And we wonder, the question is what would you point to as some of the most important things that Rabbi Sachs brought to the world during his time as chief rabbi and after?
So I really thank the listener for asking that. What a huge, deep loss for the world. Now, that's quite a statement to make. It wasn't a loss for the British Jewish community, for the British nation. not for world Jewry, the world. What an impact this exceptionally special man made, and what a privilege we had to live with him and to learn from him. I can speak endlessly about him, and I'm in awe at the deep sense of loss globally further to his passing, which has been absolutely extraordinary, and what a tribute to him, and how proud we all are of the incredible impact that he made. But I would, because I don't have the time, let me highlight one word. It's the word inspiration. It's something which I say in my addresses to rabbis very often. What is the best adjective you can use about a rabbi, about a spiritual leader? There are many fine adjectives: caring, respectful, dependable, brilliant. But for me, actually, the very best term, the very best characteristic, compliment is inspirational. Because when a person inspires, they can actually change the direction of people's lives. It's more than information, it's inspiration. And that's what Rabbi Sacks did. You know, through his addresses, a most incredible orator, through his writings. And part of his greatness is that when it comes to inspirational people, their inspirational lasts well beyond their physical lifetime. And that certainly is happening with regard to him.
Thank you. My friend and fellow JCRC board member, Daphne Price, who is the executive director of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, has a question. And she says, because of the pandemic, over the past year, as people have been limited to being at home, we've seen a rise in both domestic abuse statistics and domestic abuse awareness. Some of this, she says, has manifested itself through grassroots advocacy efforts, raising awareness about, for example, what amounts to forced marriage in the Haredi community, and others through recently passed legislation making get denial a criminal offense. Daphne is asking, what are the responsibilities and opportunities to provide support and resources to individuals, particularly women who find themselves in need? And I suppose I would add to that domestic abuse through all denominations, which as people, all countries are reporting that as people are more at home, though there's less reporting and there may be more instances. How can we support all communities within the Jewish spectrum, support Haredi and establishment leadership in these efforts?
Okay, so thank you very much for that question. People should not hesitate to talk, and those they talk to need to listen. But that is not good enough. Action is then required thereafter. So if we're talking about talking, listening, and acting, sadly, not everybody who suffers abuse actually speaks about it. And that means that there aren't sufficient opportunities for them to be helped. And also, in some circumstances, particularly when it comes to mental illness, sharing what one's going through with others helps enormously. If it's all bottled in, it's simply not good for one. It's exceptionally important to talk, to report, and we, within our religious circles, must go out of our way to encourage people to talk and to let them know they will be listened to, and beyond that, that we're going to be doing something about that. And there have been well-publicized instances of people who have reported and who haven't been well listened to, and where action hasn't adequately taken place. We need to keep the law, and it's abundantly clear that in this respect, Jewish law supports the law of the land, and you might hear in some circles that a person could be called a moiser if they hand over information to the regular legal authorities, and we need to deal with matters in-house. That is not the case. I am firmly of the view that within Jewish law, considerations relating to Mesira do not apply here. And in situations of abuse, we have a legal responsibility as responsible citizens to report to the relevant authorities, because that is the right thing to do. And people who come to us need to know that they will be protected by us. We will act appropriately. We will involve the relevant authorities. And of course, within our community structures, we need to have safeguarding procedures, and we need to train people, such as what we do in our circles with our rabbis, with our Rebbitzins community workers, to ensure that we are acting in a responsible way. And yes, there are certain circles where perhaps some elements of how people meet others and shidduchim and so on, I wouldn't use any generalized terms about entire communities, but certainly forced marriage is something which is totally, absolutely unacceptable. It's anathema to us. You know, you've got the biblical example. It's the very first shidduch that took place in the book of Genesis, where Eliezer travels to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac. Rivka is identified, and then the family of Rivka, you know, that kind of ticked all the boxes on the form, they then turned to her and they said, will you go with the man? It's your choice. And you know, there was no imposition of anything upon her, and it was fully her decision, and that is what needs to happen. Sometimes I think it's a mitzvah to help people to find a shidduch, to help them to be part of a process, but ultimately they must have absolute full freedom and meet people for as often as is necessary before they take one of the most important decisions of their lives.
You know, what's so interesting to me is that there's such a myriad of issues, and but as you have said several times during this conversation, we haven't stopped, even as the pandemic has been such a departure from our usual lives. We haven't stopped thinking. Advocacy groups for every kind of issue haven't stopped pushing things forward. Disease, medical research, religious, whether it's not just religious, but Jewish unity. And so Daphne's question makes me sort of think how resilient, to overuse a word again, we have been during this time. And that it seems to me, I should put it in the form of a question, but it seems to me that remaining involved in these issues, pushing forward in these issues, as you said, gives us a good framework for when we emerge. Do you think?
No, absolutely. We have a concept called Hezbollah Introspection, introspection, which usually we highlight during the 10 days of penitence between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But actually, all of COVID has been a time for Hezbollah Introspection. It's something we've all been naturally doing, thinking of priorities in life, reappraising what we do, how we do it. And I have come across so many people who have changed direction during COVID for the better. And I'll give you just one example at a community level, which I'm so excited about. It's something which happened in Scotland last night. So last night, the results of the vote were announced, and the two major Jewish congregations in Glasgow are going to amalgamate. So you must have this in many American cities. We've got it throughout the Commonwealth, where you would have two major congregations. Everybody knows, due to decline in numbers, they need to amalgamate. Everybody agrees they must amalgamate, but the people in this synagogue say, we're the ones to stay open. The others say, we're the ones to stay open. The result is, so very often, they both continue being open until both fizzle out without having had the advantage of amalgamating their forces. And that's what was happening in Glasgow with the two main synagogues. But thanks to COVID, it has prompted people to think afresh and anew. And last night, over 90% of people, they needed a 2/3 majority, over 90% of the Glasgow Jewish community decided one is going to close, the other is going to open. We're going to do the impossible. It's for the sake of our future. Without COVID, that would never have happened. And I think, therefore, if as individuals we've been thinking, gosh, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, act on your impulse. This pandemic has so many silver linings. Let's smell the coffee, learn the lessons, move forward in a constructive way.
That's a wonderful example. We have one in Washington community too, and that is under the direction of the Jewish Community Relations Council. We've been supporting hospital employees, many of whom have had their incomes hurt because they've lost hours, a spouse has lost a job. And so we have been supporting them in the form of food pantries. But what has been amazing is that it's been working together, reconstructions, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox synagogues, each one taking their turn. And so that is something that, as you say, the example you give of Scotland, the example that we have here, I think that while we'll emerge, I think, a little bit battered, do you think we'll emerge stronger?
It depends on us. Yeah, I think how we'll emerge will depend on us. Let's be determined to learn those lessons, because otherwise we could emerge being weaker than before.
Here, I think determination really is all. Here in the United States, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control yesterday issued guidelines, and they're emerging. They've promised that they're going to be more that we'll be able to do. But at least for now, at least at this moment, just if you were unvaccinated and there was a small family group that was unvaccinated, you might be able to be together. But what that turns out to be is, once again, there won't be the 20, 30 family member Seders that people are used to. So I was wondering, as we go into Passover, just in just a couple of weeks, what are some, we all got lessons and ideas for how to handle it last year. What are things that you're thinking about how to make our Seders, perhaps they'll be a little bit bigger than they were last year, perhaps the same, perhaps some of us will be on our own. What are things to be thinking about so that we go into Passover, not thinking, thinking ahead, but not trying hard not to, be wistful about the past, but be happy in the present?
It's such a huge challenge, and it's so sad. Last year my message before Passover was, don't worry everybody, this is a one-off. It's not going to happen again. Let's get through this together. Gam ze yavor, this too will pass. And now we're finding that it's the second one in the row. And for us here in the UK, as is the case in many places in the world, as you alluded to, it's going to be under very challenging circumstances. My heart goes out particularly to people who are just by themselves. And it's something which shouldn't happen, the Passover Seder, just by yourself, and particularly when it comes to elderly people. So in the first instance, let's recognize that with the best of plans, it's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. Let's give support. Let's give emotional support. Let's send those food parcels. Let's send that love. Let them know they might be alone, but they shouldn't feel lonely, because we're with them, and let them be smothered with the attention and the care and the affection of all those around them. To answer your question at a practical level, I think there are enormous opportunities. For many people, the Passover Seder is a social event. It's a time to celebrate family. Now that the numbers of people will not be as large as usual, let's celebrate tradition, what it is that we're here for. And let's celebrate not so much what we have to live with, but rather what we have to live for. Let's concentrate on our tradition, on the God-given opportunities we have for spirituality. Let's concentrate not just on questions, but also on answers. Passover is known as the festival of questions. I think the adults have a responsibility. Let's prepare great answers. Let us pose questions to the children. Let's have pre-prepared answers. Let's direct them. How can we give them a moment to remember? For the rest of all of our lives, we will remember everything we experienced during COVID, and particularly the younger element within our communities. So when they are grandparents talking to their grandchildren, do you know what happened in 2021 when I was this high, and I was at the Passover Seder table, and this is what my parents told me. Let's create those thoughts, those moments in time, which will have an impact on people. Let's share from the heart messages we want our children to know. Let's tell them we love them, we appreciate them. Let's tell them about how precious our Judaism is, how we emerged from Egypt to go to Sinai, not to just live, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's an enormous opportunity here. And it doesn't mean to say that the Seder needs to be long. Sometimes we kill the Passover Seder by making it too long. Let it be crisp, fresh, to the point, but it's that word inspirational again. Let's make them inspirational.
Thank you for that. We're coming up toward the end of our conversation. I don't want to call it the end. I hope that we'll not only get to continue at the Jewish community with you, Rabbi Mervis, but that also when this is behind us, you'll come and visit us and we'll all get to study with you and learn from you in person as well. One question that we've been getting a lot in the chat is about anti-Semitism. And it's so interesting to me that at a time when Pfizer is led by a Jew and Tal Zaks, the chief scientist at Moderna, an Israeli, they're responsible for what's taking us out, what will take us out of this pandemic. Nevertheless, anti-Semitism has continued to rear its head. What does that surprise you that as we've in such a tough time and nevertheless anti-Semitism continues? And to say to you, what should we do is too large a question, but where would you focus our thinking about it?
Major question. And, we've suffered here in Europe. We had the Holocaust. It affected the whole world. Anti-Semitism has raised its ugly head yet again. And I know that in America, you are experiencing the depth of intense anti-Semitism in some respects. And in the first instance, we should never be shy. We should never turn the other cheek. We need to fight against it. We need to stand up, to be proud of our Jewish identity. But fighting against it sometimes means to act in a wise way. Sometimes the best way is behind the scenes. Have that political strategy, work through education, establish good partnerships. I have found that voices of non-Jewish people are far more impactful than the voices of Jewish people when it comes to anti-Semitism. And therefore, let's encourage the many wonderful friends we have out there to also be fearless and to stand up. There's so much that can be done in interfaith circles, establishing relationships. I think that relationships are hugely important because once you have a personal relationship with somebody, then at the time of a testing time for one, people will be ready to stand up for one. And of course, it works both ways. Let's show that as a people, we're here to protect ourselves, but we also love every human being on earth. And I think that's also very important, that people appreciate what I was saying earlier about the fact that for us, every human life is sacred. And let's also ensure that we don't just lie down and allow people to steamroll over us. We have to be courageous and we have to manage this fight with tenacity. We've had experiences here in Britain where that has been our approach, and in other places in Europe. And certainly I admire American Jewish leaders enormously for the fight that you've been engaged in. I'm just saying the obvious here. We do also need help from God. And once again, we're praying to him and he's asking us to be his partners. And we are aware of God's eternal promise to us, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish nation, despite what anybody might intend to do, will live on and will live on in strength.
One last Passover question and then one Israel question. And that is, a question is, what are you bringing to your Seder table that is either new, something you haven't done before, but maybe is something that we can listen to or share an idea about?
Gosh, what am I bringing to my Seder table? My Seder table will be miserable and will be amazing. It will be miserable. It'll be myself and my wife. That's it. And do you know, we have a son and daughter-in-law and their 5 children living across the road, but they can't be with us. And other children and grandchildren around the world. So we'll be miserable because of what we're missing out on. But together with that, it will be incredible because we're blessed. And we'll be counting our blessings. And we'll be thanking God with our thoughts about our family and wherever they are, and their bond to us and their bond with the Jewish faith. And Pesach is a time to reflect on achievement. You know, the Torah gives us a mitzvah, "V'samachta b'chagecha v'yitzach samech." Rejoice in your festival, be exceptionally happy. And that's it. It's an imperative. It's one of the commandments of the Torah. How can I be exceptionally happy? What happens if I'm feeling miserable, if I'm not in the mood? But the Torah says you have to be happy. What does it mean? There are two words in the Torah for joy. One is sason, which means elation. The other simcha, which means happiness. Sason means you're laughing out loud. You're elated. Simcha means deep-rooted satisfaction. And that's something you can always have. Reb Nachman of Bratslav taught, mitzvah gedoyle liot besimcha tamid. It's a great precept always to have simcha. You can be sitting shiva, you'll have simcha. God forbid you can be exceptionally ill, you can have simcha. Why? Simcha is something you feel. Because I've achieved a lot, I feel fulfilled. And I say, thank God for giving me these opportunities. So my wife and I will have an incredible amount of simcha, because we'll be able to reflect on, you know, what it is that we have been blessed with. And straight after the festival, we'll be on the phone and we'll be in touch, etc. And you know, in the UK this year, we've got the strangest of circumstance. You know, new laws come into place on Mondays. So it will be on Monday, the 29th of March, that we'll be able to socialize outdoors with 2 households up to 6 people. That is just after the 2 Seder nights. So the 2 Seder nights, it'll be my wife, myself and my wife, and literally the next day, we'll be able to socialize. So we nearly were able to have the Seders together, but it doesn't matter. This will be, please God, the last year. We're concentrating on what there is to celebrate. And please God, we'll have some sasan as well, reasons to laugh out loud.
You know, I found that really inspiring. I think that your honesty, I think, is what is so important, because I think we all feel, we see what we've gained, we see what we've lost, and to learn from you, to put an emphasis on what we've gained, it really makes such a difference, I think, for everyone, to the best of our ability to do that. Having read your writings, Rabbi Mervis, some of your writings, and having listened to your podcast, I know how front and center Israel is for you. And it's extraordinary. I wanted to close out with this. As a reporter, I attend by Zoom a White House press briefing 3 mornings a week, and they all have the same format. The head of the COVID response speaks, then the head of the CDC gives the numbers report, and then Dr. Fauci speaks. And he, instead of taking a question immediately, he presents. And he usually talks about a new study. The reason you're getting this long preamble is in almost like more than 50% of the time, he says, we had a study out today from Israel. And how amazing it is that in this incredible pandemic, the worst time that we've known, at least in 100 years, how much Israel is front and center, not only the medical response, not only in the data and the study response, but also that people have continued to make aliyah. People have moved, religious and non-religious people, in this tough time when it's just all you see on Facebook today is, how do I get a flight? Nevertheless, in this very tough time, Israel has been front and center on everyone's mind. And so many people who've thought about going haven't hesitated to go, despite the pandemic. I was wondering if you could speak to that just for a minute as we think about Passover as the time of leaving Egypt and heading to Israel. And Israel in the world is so front and center. How amazing is that?
that was worthwhile for me to sit here just to hear you talking. That's brilliant, Fran. Thank you, Fran. And I'd love to be part of those press briefings. Wow, what an opportunity you've got. For me, it all goes back to Lech Lecha. So in Genesis, when God gives Abraham and Sarah, our patriarch and matriarch, the imperative to make Aliyah, to go to the Holy Land, what does God tell them? What's the purpose of them going to the Holy Land? The words there are, "V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama u'v'zarecha." And through you in the Holy Land, there will be blessed all families on earth. So thanks to you and your descendants, all families on earth will be blessed. That's the purpose of Israel, to be a blessing for all nations. And that's exactly what you were speaking about. One of the greatest troubles we have relates to anti-Semitism, and that is the more impactful Israel is, the more some people resent it. And there is that negative backlash, but that shouldn't put us off. And sure enough, Israel has always been an incredible inspiration as a state of Israel since 1948. What a marvelous country it is, a country with many failings, a country with many weaknesses. But what an incredible inspirational country it is. And certainly thanks to Israel, all families and all nations on earth are right now being blessed. And you know, there are many who in response to calls for BDS say, if you're going to boycott Israel, you won't be able to hold a mobile phone in your hand, you won't be able to use your PC. What will be, you know, so many advances in medicine, and what's happening during the pandemic is one huge example of this. So we're proud of the achievements of Israel.
Amazing. On behalf of the Jewish Community Relations Council, your friends from AIPAC last year who look forward to seeing you at AIPAC next year, our audience and their wonderful questions. We have so many more questions we didn't get to that we will have no choice, and it will be our delight to bring you back by Zoom and to meet you in person. On behalf of everyone, I wish you a Chag Sameach, happy Passover. Thank you for sharing this hour with us.
Thank you, Fran, and thanks to all of you. And it's frustrating that I'm not in real life contact with all of you, but thank God we've got this opportunity. And yes, as you say, please God, we'll have that opportunity in person to meet. And to all of you and your families, Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Please have that simcha. Remember all the blessings that you've got, and please God, this will be the last one of its kind.
Thank you.
Thank you.